It is commonly taught in junior grades that gross brain matter is the cause of intelligence, thought, and consciousness. To be precise, here is a map of different divisions of the brain as per their commonly said functionality. However, beginning from animals with simple intelligence, there are many cases in biological history that defy this common understanding of intelligence. Here is the case of a chicken which lived for 18 months after decapitation.
Back in the 40s, when my grandparents were running the farm, they raised fryer roosters. My grandfather would chop the heads off, and my grandmother would start picking and cleaning the feathers. Well, he would just keep chopping and throwing them down there in a pile, and they got to the end and one still was alive walking around. Now he told me that, on occasion one would get up and they'd flop around and maybe live for a few minutes, but they'd always go ahead and die. But they had one that didn't die.
And that was Mike.
And after it had lived for 2 or 3 days and was getting along fine, of course, neighbors started finding out about it, coming and seeing, and people were hearing about it.
So when he cut the head off, he left the base of the brainstem and actually one eardrum.
Sometimes decapitated chickens do run in a frenzy for 4 to 5 minutes. However, when Lloyd saw a couple of hours later, Mike was still standing there without a head, and it looked fine for the past 2 hours. It had been walking around, normal, headless. After a couple of days of survival, it was taken to University of Utah at Salt Lake City. Breathing and heart rate of the chicken are said to be carried out by the brainstem and reflexes by the spine.
Mike had, other than being taken around to the sideshows, tried to live a normal life. When they still had him on the farm, they let him loose with the rest of the chickens. He would go out and try to prune himself with his head, with his neck really, because he didn't have no head like a chicken would. He would try crowing, which would more of a gurgling sound, the way my grandfather described it. They would feed him by hand, cracked corn through his esophagus, and used an old eyedropper to give him water. So he did require some attention, but pretty much lived like a normal chicken, even though he didn't have a head. Mike was on exhibit in...
They showed him several times in Chicago,
Florida, Atlanta, and New York. And then I understand, now don't hold me to this, that it went overseas to England.
Thus the chicken had adapted to a newer lifestyle. Here Mike is seen standing on a lawn mover. Normally a bird would see a perch and then approach to sit, knowing it has to balance itself there. If the bird is simply doing previously learned things, how did it realize that it's a perch here? And it needs to balance. Some suggest neuroplasticity occurred in the chicken, which allowed the remaining portion of the brainstem to carry out the functions of certain missing brain areas. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to adapt and rewire itself. However, beheaded Mike ran off and was seen standing and even walking when the farmer was done with executions, which occurred within a couple of hours of Mike's execution. So practically there was no time for the brain areas to adapt cross-functionality. The fact that it did not even lose mental balance and still pretty much lived like a normal chicken, although it didn't have a head, raises questions as to why was there no notable difference in the intelligence of the bird, even though it lost such a large proportion of neurons. Here is a picture of another chicken from Wichita home. At night it hops upon boxes to roost. It didn't have eyes either, however it could hear and apparently recognize day and night from sounds. Thus the idea that these specific parts of the brain are responsible for all these functions is not valid in these cases, nor is the idea of neuroplasticity. If we look into the ancient Vedic literature, here in the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated about the mind as follows.
Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these 8 constitute my separated material energies.
Here the mind, intellect, and ego are stated as separate entities from the gross body, consisting of 5 elements. Further, they are said to be different from each other, as well as from the soul proper. These elements will further be discussed in the upcoming episodes. Some say that such cases of lack of brain lobes cannot be present in human beings. However, here is the MRI of a white-collar civil servant in France.
gachate